What's up, guys? Welcome to week 1 of the GSL, with our first battle being against the Halifax Hitmontops and Coach Hitmon. Now, before we get too far into this battle, I definitely want to say that if you guys enjoy this Generations League, then definitely make sure you subscribe to all the other coaches and leave likes on all the videos. It is greatly appreciated, and we definitely want to make sure we know how many people enjoy this. So, I wasn't expecting his team to not have Toxapex on it, but I decided that my first move was going to be going into PCBloodMaster, knowing whatever came in I could Toxic it. He starts off with Rotom Heat, which I was somewhat expecting because he was probably predicting Ferrothorn to start in. So first turn I go for Toxic, but he decided to go for a Volt Switch, which did a ton of damage for PCBloodMaster. He switches into Mew, and I Toxic, but the synchronized Toxics PCBloodMaster as well, which definitely was going to hurt us. I go for a Recover the next turn, and he goes for a Knockoff, knocking off my Leftovers. So next turn after that, I decide go for a counter, expecting Mew to hit us again, but in the end he switches into Venusaur right off the bat. I wasn't really expecting this too much, but decided I would go for Soak so I could use Toxic on it the next turn. Luckily, Toxic would still be affecting it even after it's turned back into a Poison type. He goes for Leech Seed and misses, which is just my luck. So I get the Soak off. Next turn, I knew that PCBloodMaster may get killed, but Sludge Bomb doesn't kill, so I get the Toxic off. PCBloodMaster does go down, however, which does kind of suck. But I decided to go into Ferrothorn and hopefully try to get a Thunder Wave off of whatever he switches into. I knew that he wasn't going to keep Venusaur in as a Water type against Ferrothorn, probably expecting a Power Whip. So I went for Thunder Wave. Unfortunately, he goes into Rotom Heat, which then means that I'm not going to get the Paralysis off. But either way, I did know that he was probably going to go for an Overheat, so I decided I was going to switch into Infernape. I was expecting a Overheat, but he goes for Will-O-Wisp instead. But as you can see, this is a lot of waiting, a lot of us like trying to kind of go through what we want to do, what we don't want to do. But he goes for the Will-O-Wisp, which I'm immune to, so I get a free turn in, and I go for Stealth Rocks, predicting a Volt Switch. He does do Volt Switch, which does some damage. He Volt Switches into Sylveon actually, which takes damage from the Stealth Rocks that I set up, but I was definitely not going to be keeping, I was not going to in any way keep the Infernape in at that point. As you can see, we're still kind of waiting. A lot of decisions being made. This was a really slow battle, so I do kind of apologize for that, but we both knew that we were going to have to take our time. But the Sylveon does come in. I switch out into Ferrothorn to try to take a Hyper Voice and then try to use Power Whip. Unfortunately, he switches into his Venusaur, which means that Power Whip is going to do no damage at all to that. He takes damage from the Stealth Rocks and the Toxic, which is definitely good. The Toxic is definitely going to be a big part of this battle. So I go for another Spikes. I go for some Spikes. He goes for Hidden Power, which does a ton of damage, so I'm predicting that it's Hidden Power Fire. So I switch into Infernape to take that, which he does well. So I go for a Flare Blitz onto whatever he was going to switch into, which happens to be his Hitmontop, probably trying to take out those hazards. Luckily, I did one-shot it. Unfortunately, Infernape does go down, so at this point it is 2 Pokemon down for me, only 1 for him, which I knew was probably kind of an issue, but I knew that I could probably take out at least one of his Pokemon. I knew that either the Mew or the Venusaur would probably end up going down soon, as well as the Rotom Fire could easily be taken out. But we're both at this point trying to outmaneuver the other, trying to predict what who goes into what. But I switch into Bisharp and Scott switches into Mew, so I go for a knockoff, and Mew barely lives it. When I go for it, I didn't know if I wanted to try to knock off or Trick Room, but he did have a berry to live it just enough. But he gets the Trick Room off, which I knew was probably going to be an issue because now that means all of his slower Pokemon are going to be outspeeding all of my Pokemon except for Garbodor and Ferrothorn. But I decided to try to go for a Sucker Punch, which he went for Will-O-Wisp, so it didn't do anything. Bisharp's attack has now been cut in half, so I knew that I could sack him off if I really needed to. So I sack off with another Sucker Punch and get killed by Overheat, which leaves me down with 3 Mons, being Gallade, Ferrothorn, and Garbodor. I haven't brought Gallade out just yet. I haven't, but I did decide to go in. I forgot about the Trick Room for some reason. I was really focused on it, and I tried to go for a Drain Punch. Unfortunately, I did at that point. I realized that if a Will-O-Wisp hit Gallade, I was definitely done for. There was no way I was going to be able to win this at all. None of my moves would have been doing anything. Luckily, the Will-O-Wisp misses. That was by far the most game-changing part of this battle, and both me and Scott knew it. So, I knew at this point that I could definitely win this if I play my cards right. So I switch out of from Life Art because I knew that thing was probably going to be trying to hinder Gallade a little more. So I go into Ferrothorn because I knew Ferrothorn was kind of a Pokemon I could sack off at this point. I tried to T-Wave it, hoping he would go into Sylveon, but then kind of realizing that I had a Steel type out, so he probably wasn't going to do that. But I decided to set up some spikes. As his Venusaur went for Synthesis and then goes for Hidden Power, which takes out Ferrothorn. So I go into Gallade knowing that I can outspeed now, and I hope and pray that an Ice Punch can kill, and it does. It's perfect. That's just enough damage to kill, which leaves him down to Liepard and Sylveon. He switches into Sylveon, so I switch out into Garbodor and take the Hyper Voice, and then decide to go for a Gunk Shot. He switches into Liepard, but the spikes and the Stealth Rocks are just enough for it to go down to the Gunk Shot. He goes into Sylveon, and I decide to use Explosion. I live with just enough health to from the Psyshock, and I kill with the Explosion. Now that was by far the most fearing part of this entire battle. Now, at this point, the video is probably over, but I just want to point out, this is probably going to be staring at a blank screen for you guys, but this battle was definitely something I was really, really afraid of. I was definitely afraid that Scott would be able to outpredict me. I knew that Scott would possibly be able to take me out. That Will-O-Wisp missing was definitely the only reason we won. If that Will-O-Wisp had not missed, if that Will-O-Wisp had hit Gallade, my attacks would have been doing nothing. The Venusaur probably would have lived, and probably could have taken out my team. Now, if I'd still been able to take out the Rotom Heat, the Venusaur still would have taken me out. That Rotom Heat definitely, if that Will-O-Wisp had hit, would have lived. Probably would have lived at least. And even if it didn't, Venusaur would not go down in any way, shape, or form, and he would probably just be able to switch into Sylveon freely or Liepard. So, really, if I'm being 100% honest, I feel like we won Week 1 kind of off of luck. There was no way that I would have won, because I decided to do something that was probably not a smart idea, knowing that there was a Trick Room up and going into a faster Pokemon against a slower Pokemon. But either way, we did win Week 1 of the Generations Showdown League, which is definitely awesome. I have to say, good game for Scott. He definitely played a great game. So really, all props to him. His team was awesome. His team was definitely something I had to fear. His team is actually the team that I feared the most out of all of the others. So the fact that we won definitely makes me a little more excited, and I feel like I'm ready for Week 2 against the Washington Weaviles. So Arsenal, if you are watching this, I am ready for you, buddy. Scott, you played a great game. Props to you, man. But that's it. So that is the end. Hope you guys are ready for Week 2. Arsenal, like I said, if you're watching this, we're coming. So if you guys enjoyed, leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.